Okay, so my lesson is going to focus on non-fiction writing for the language paper 2, question 5, article writing. Um, so we'll start with a do now, which will sort of check some prior knowledge and fill in any gaps that the student might have, which they will need for later on. So research the following and write your answers in full sentences. What is a broadsheet newspaper and how is it different to a tabloid newspaper? So this will allow the student to engage in the kind of idea of the format of a broadsheet, what goes into it, and start to think about the audience possibly of a broadsheet newspaper. And then to gather some ideas that they can use in their article later on for positives and negatives, I've encouraged them to make a table, do some online research into positives and negatives of teenagers using mobile phones, and then hopefully this will allow them to draw on these ideas when they come to plan their article later on. So I've set a time limit of 5 minutes. So it's mostly independent work. We'll do a feedback after this and we'll discuss their ideas and I'll prompt anything from them that I believe maybe is lacking. For example, possibly things like the formality of broadsheet newspapers, etc. In the next part of the lesson, we are given a exam style question. So students have too many distractions in daily life, mobile phones and music players should be banned. So obviously this is quite um, an appropriate question for a student as it reflects ideas around what they believe as teenagers. And the task itself is to write a broadsheet newspaper article in which you explain your point of view on this statement, and then it gives the mark scheme there. I could also provide the student with the mark scheme. We could spend some time going through that depending on how familiar or unfamiliar they are um, with this. This lesson, I should add, would be probably aimed at year 10s who have had some prior experience in Key Stage 3 of writing articles. So they wouldn't be coming at this completely blind. That's why it's not ultra scaffolded at the beginning. But obviously, I can, adapt to the student, and we can scaffold where appropriate. If they need things like sentence starters later on, that will be something I can add. So we start to talk about these keywords of purpose, tone, and audience, and there's a couple of questions to prompt their thinking about that, and we can have a discussion about those ideas based on the questions there. And then I'll give the overall learning objectives. We've had these kind of introductory tasks to get our minds thinking about the style of writing, etc., and bring some prior knowledge and fill in maybe some gaps in knowledge. And these are the formal learning objectives to better understand how to write an article to explain. So the students are aware exactly what they're being expected to do during this lesson, to manage your language use when considering purpose, tone, and audience, which we've just explored the meaning of, and to complete a language paper 2 question 5 style timed response. What is the purpose? So obviously writing to explain is the purpose, and then we break this down into this little table here that gives further information. So I'll obviously get the student to read that and that will prompt any questions. It has also a kind of mini checklist of things to include, features, which is what we'll come back to later on when they're actually planning their writing. And then there's an explanation here of what it means, and again, requirements for the task. And when thinking about the audience, who are the audiences of the readers of a broadsheet, and they're looking to be informed, interested, and engaged. And then we've got things that will hopefully achieve that as again another checklist underneath upgraded vocabulary. I'll explain what that means, slightly more formal language, carefully planned out structure that supports your ideas and how you get them across to your readers. Appealing to the readers of a broadsheet newspaper through your choice of writing to explain and article language techniques. So that's some of those devices, as in the last screen, which were adding sort of some statistics, for example, or different sides of the debate, etc. So what's the form of the article? It's got to have a clear and original title, strapline, subheadings, introductory, overview, paragraph, and effective, fluently sequenced paragraphs. So this is obviously getting into the structure and the nuts and bolts of what is expected from this article. So putting these elements into your article means you are showing the examiner you can write a specific form of writing. Obviously, this is what we're being graded on, and also that you think about the register, style, and tone of your writing carefully. Obviously, I can concept check those again. This idea of register, style, and tone, so that the student's aware of what they're being asked here. A couple of questions to get them thinking about that. What is the purpose of each of these bullet points? So these here on the left, and a little research task, research online, and write a full sentence answer for each of these. So that will be a bit of quiet time where they go and do some research. Obviously, I can chip in if they have any questions during that phase. And then obviously showing them a model answer. They need to know what a good one looks like. So providing them with a model that I've written. Now you've been given an example of a really effective piece of writing that responds to the same task as you did. So read through it carefully and make notes on what you think works well in the article. So this is sort of roughly having a look at those checklists, reading through the article. We could do this on a visualizer together if they're maybe a weaker student, or if they're sort of a more able student, you might get them to do this on their own. They could print it out beforehand, or they could live do it on a screen. If they share their screen with me, we could do it together. And they would go through and look at what elements this model answer gets right, in terms of it's got a clear title, it's got a strap line, you have subheadings, etc. The tone and the form are appropriate for the audience, etc. And we would go through that, and that would allow us to explain to the student anything that they're still not understanding, just to kind of prime them ready for the more independent work later on. So this is kind of a form of scaffolded connection with the structure. And then the form of the article, so highlight and number the following in the example. Again, they're carrying on, sort of going deeper into this article: a clear and original title, strapline, subheadings, an introductory paragraph, fluently sequenced paragraphs. So this is what they will be hoping to get familiar with, and then they will use that as the basis of structure for their own article. And then we have the actual question again, but this time it's prompting them to plan their response. So I'm going to give them 20 minutes to answer the task, there to complete the task, and I'll encourage them to use the other parts of the slides for structure, for style. Use the model answer. They can do some mind mapping. I could bring up a whiteboard where we could mind map some ideas about how we're going to approach this, what would possibly be a good title for your article, any ideas on strap lines, what might be your main headings first of all before they even write any of the detail, and then maybe we could go through starting with the introduction. We could do a we do, so we could do one together first of all, depending on how much support the student needs. Or if they're again a strong student, then we can allow them to go ahead and spend that time researching and writing and planning to get where I can see it, so that I can maybe ask some probing questions, prompt them if there's some areas that they could add to make it even better, their plan even better. And then that would lead to them doing the homework task. The reason I've set the actual exam task for homework is obviously it's 45 minutes, and I think we want to mimic exam conditions, which is not a good use of time in a lesson. So I would allow them to do that at home, and then they would obviously do that hopefully in time conditions using all of the prompts and the plan that they've already produced and any ideas that they've written down from our discussions. They would hopefully come to the next lesson with that, or they would email it to me and then I would have a look at it and mark it, and then that would be the basis for a follow-up feedback lesson where they could do something like this, which is using the following scales to assess their own writing first of all before I give them feedback. So looking specifically at the assessment objectives, which obviously is really important to familiarize themselves with so that they know exactly what is expected of them should they get an article for their language paper 2 question 5 in the actual exam. So being able to have a look, and areas where, for example, they score low on this, we would then try to give them a pin so they would have praise. What did they do well? So we'd celebrate that. What improvements could we make? So we'd note that down, and then that would inform the now. So what you should do to show improvement, and I'd give them a bit of time at the beginning of the lesson to assess themselves with my help, hopefully, and then I will give them my feedback from the marked piece of work, and that would lead to us then working together to create an upgraded version of that, and hopefully by the end you will be able to see an improvement in the overall scores, which would show, which would give me the data to show that my lesson has been effective and that they've actually managed to improve. So I hope that's all logical, and I hope that that fits quite well in with the format of online teaching. You could also use things like maybe Kahoot at the start of the next lesson to do maybe a recall of conventions in an article, for example, or even the whole of language paper 2. What does it involve? So I quite like using those kinds of online platforms to help further engage students. Thank you very much.